Well, good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming out. It's good to see a full audience, so you've done what most of our audiences managed to do, somehow managed to leave the first two rows almost entirely empty. So I don't know if it's not just a Catholic thing in church or wherever. My name is Tom Landy. I'm the director of the McFarland Center for Religion, Ethics, and Culture here at the college. The McFarland Center sponsors and supports a range of programs that explore questions on meaning, morality, and mutual obligation. You can find our events online at holycross.edu/McFarland Center. In the future, the same would be true for this evening's talk. This month we mark the 30th anniversary of the 100-day-long Rwandan genocide that killed 800,000 Tutsis, a smaller number of moderate Hutus who sought to defend them. Those events in 1994 displaced millions more people in the months and years that followed and disrupted many lives. Catholics in Rwanda and elsewhere have had to grapple with how, in a country permeated by Christianity, such brutal things could have happened. How not only ordinary Catholics, but also clergy, participated actively in horrific violence. Tonight, and all day tomorrow, we reckon with that genocide and its legacy. Thanks to Professor Audrey Sia, who's here, who I'll introduce shortly, and the scholars who've traveled here to speak, beginning with Father Marcel Uwineza, we'll have a chance to look at what the genocide and the reconciliation that follow it mean to the worldwide church. Audrey will introduce Father Uwineza and say more about what she hopes to accomplish. And I'll just mention, I don't know if she was going to do it, but among his books, we'll have some for sale later on. So I don't know if you were supposed to do that or I was supposed to do that, but we'll cover it. Those will be for sale from one of his books. I'll leave that one up here. We have heavy matters to deal with tonight, and perhaps also some astounding examples of forgiveness and reconciliation. But before we go any further, Audrey and I wanted to honor and remember the survivors and victims of the genocide with just a minute of silence. So please join me in that. Audrey?
Thank you, Tom. On behalf of the College of Holy Cross, I extend a heartfelt welcome to all of you, especially those who have joined us from afar. Titled 30 Years After the Rwandan Genocide, Lessons for the Global Church, this symposium embodies the spirit of Pope Francis's encyclical on social friendship, Fratelli Tutti, which recognizes the need to dream together across boundaries with one another as a single human family, as fellow travelers sharing the same flesh, as children of the same earth, which is our common home. While much scholarship on the genocide, including those centered around the role of the church, have examined Rwanda's past and its recovery into the present, few have considered the event's broader implications for the church beyond Rwanda in the third millennium. In solidarity with Rwandans, the papers that will be discussed tomorrow aims to fill this gap by putting the genocide in conversation with other historical, geographical, and pastoral contexts. Following the symposium, we intend for the papers to be published in a special issue of the Journal of Global Catholicism later in the year. So I invite you to join us tomorrow if you're able. We begin this evening with a keynote address by Father Marcel Uwineza, a Rwandan Jesuit and survivor of the genocide. Father Uwineza holds a PhD in systematic theology from Boston College and an MBA in leadership and management from St. John University in York, UK. His research and teaching interests include Christian anthropology, ecclesiology, genocide studies, religion, and ethics. Father Uwineza serves on the board of the journal Theological Studies and is currently principal of Hekima University College, Nairobi, Kenya, where he was formerly dean. His recent book publications include Risen from the Ashes, which is available for purchase at the end of the talk if you're interested. It's a theology as autobiography, and it's his own, he's writing from his own experience of the genocide. Another book that was recently published is called Reinventing Theology in Post-Genocide Rwanda, Challenges and Hopes, published in 2023 by Georgetown University Press. And his forthcoming book is titled Healing a Wounded People, A Theology for a Divided World, due to be published this year by Brill. Among his many public addresses, one recalls his address to the United Nations General Assembly on April 12, 2019, on 25 years after the genocide in Rwanda, a testimony. Welcome, Father Uwineza.
Dear Tom, if you allow me to use that, and Audrey and all the distinguished guests and professors who have been invited, and to all of you who have turned up for this conference and this inaugural lecture, good evening. In the time allocated to me, I will just go straight to my topic. And I speak certainly from the perspective of history, of why there was a genocide, and then the impacts of the genocide, the power of forgiveness, and then also the global lessons for the global church. 30 years beyond the genocide, lessons for the global church. And I am really honored to be invited to this August assembly. One day, the killers came and murdered some people in front of the Little Sisters of Jesus convent in Rwanda, in the eastern part of Rwanda, and then they buried their bodies in front of their yard. After they left, the sisters were traumatized, and their dog kept trying to get their attention by barking, as if wanting to call their attention to something going on outside. The sisters were very much afraid, if we go out, the killers may come. Eventually, they found out that the dog was trying to bring their attention to the place where the bodies were buried, because one of the women in the graves was still alive. Though she suffered life-altering injuries, she eventually survived and lived to tell the story. And in his book, Jean Bosco Rutagengwa says this: as mean as this animal was, he showed more humanity than the killers in 1994 in Rwanda. But how did we get there, that dogs could be more human than human beings? The genocide committed specifically against the minority Tutsi and those who refused to side with the genocidal regime is a fact of history. The Tutsis were not struck by thunder, which came by surprise, unexpectedly. Ntabwo bakubiswe n'inkuba. The killings were planned and targeted the Tutsis for who they are, from the eldest to the unborn. To question the genocide is criminally and theologically reprehensible, because it further dehumanizes those who were murdered and those who survived the ordeal. While any and every genocide or every killing blasphemes against God, in no way does this exculpate any other killings that happened in Rwanda. And these too deserve exposure. Still, these killings cannot dismiss the question of whether or not there was a genocide of Tutsis in Rwanda. And I would like to underscore this, because in the rising testimonies and rising social medias, sometimes there is a lot of ambiguity on who was targeted. Indeed, Helen Hitjensen analogy is apt to clarify my point here, and I quote, "If the present racialist and militaristic policies of Israel, and they have become very evident today, even more so, if their policies towards their neighbors and Palestinian people were taken as evidence that there was no genocide against the Jews during the Second World War, there would be outrage. The same rejection of false logic or moral equivalence should be maintained in the Rwandan case." So the search for truth is therefore of the ultimate significance. I agree with Gerard Prunier, who writes, he's a scholar on Rwandan history. He writes, and I quote, "Understanding why the Tutsis died is the best and most fitting memorial we can raise for the victims. Letting their deaths go unnoticed or disobeyed by propaganda or misunderstood through simple cliché or different names would in fact bring the last touch of the killer's work in completing the victim's dehumanization. So it's good to call it by its name." 30 years after the genocide against the Tutsis, orchestrated by Rwanda's leaders, many still wonder how this crime could happen and account for 1 million deaths in just 100 days. Some survivors are still looking for the remains of their relatives in order to bury them. There is a Chilean scholar, some of you may know him, William Cavanaugh. Though he was writing for a different context, maybe his words may be appropriate for many in Rwanda who are still looking for bodies of their relatives. And I quote, "When my son turned 17, he felt so much that he had to know where his father was, that I said to him, 'Son, go down to the cemetery and look for the most abandoned grave. Take care of it and visit it as though it was your father.'" In Rwanda, there are so many who still long to see where their people are buried. Given Rwanda's horrific past, we must ask what made the genocide possible. What has been its impact? What roles does forgiveness play? How does one use the suffering endured by all Rwandans, not only Tutsi, to offer the lessons for our global church? So this is the structure of my presentation. First, how was the genocide possible? Underdressed or undressed, long-standing divisions we've seen in the abuse of power, negative ethnicity, greed for resources, and the humanization of perceived enemy, in this case, majority the Tutsi, fear, hatred, lies, complacency, and all kinds of feelings, all put together, created a fertile ground for the genocide. The genocide in Rwanda in 1994 was rooted in an ethnic divide between the Hutu and Tutsi and Twa, the effects of which were painfully felt for many decades, leading to that tragedy. I am aware that a lot of writings have been done on this, but maybe what is often ignored are the immediate preparation to the genocide. So I will focus on this. The road to the genocide against the Rwandan Tutsi, several factors. There were several factors that led to the genocide. I highlight a few. First, ethnic ideology gained public space and sanctioned the near total exclusion of Tutsis. The slogan, when we were hiding in the grass, in the bush, was "kill all of them so that a Rwandan in the future would ask how they used to look like." Ethnic segregation was manipulated as an alibi for Rwanda's economic crisis, caused partly by a sharp decline in coffee prices and by the declining aid to Rwanda from the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund in the late 1980s. The international community also pressured many African countries, Rwanda included, to begin the process of the multi-party system of governance. Rwanda became a smearing pot of competing political parties, ideologies, and loyalties that used ethnicity as incentive to attract members to their camps. Another factor is criminality arose among many unemployed youth who had no vision for a future in a poor country. Local militias were then created through these unemployed youth. The national army developed, and Hutu population weaponized some Hutu population, not all of them. So it's good to put this in once. Some Hutu population weaponized against the Tutsis. There were many armed youth groups. So this is one of the factors that is often ignored. And among these groups, you have the Interahamwe, those who fight together, and they belong to the ruling party, MRND, and they were founded in 1991. It was the Interahamwe were trained by the National Army. During the genocide, they were killing champions of Tutsis in collaboration with the National Army. Another group was the Youth Militia of Coalition pour la Défense de la République. Its main agenda was to mobilize the Hutus to kill the Tutsis and any other Hutu who did not support their killing frenzy. There was another group called Turi Hose, which means we are everywhere, made up of some Hutus from Gisenyi Prefecture under the leadership of Hassan Ngeze. Turi Hose was given special training to kill many people and in a short time. So that explains why in a year, in 100 days, they were able to kill so many people. Finally, another group, Amahindu, a group from the northern part of Rwanda, founded in 1993. They killed many people at the Busogo parish and religious convent in Mukingo commune, and killed many displaced Tutsis at the Court of Appeal in Ruhengeri. Another factor is that the refugees who had lived for years in exile also formed the political party in 1987, the Rwanda Patriotic Front, a rebel army. The Rwandan Patriotic Army, commonly known as Inkotanyi, the Invincible, led by Kagame, the current president. The Inkotanyi invaded the country from Uganda on October 1st, 1990. Not surprisingly, tensions arose within the country when this rebel army invaded. And Tutsis living in the country became scapegoats for their Tutsis who lived outside. Many were incarcerated, tortured, and killed, and their houses were burnt and properties sequestered. Another factor, again, that shows that Rwanda, the genocide in Rwanda was not just a striking, like a thunder. There was the famous Kangura newspaper, Wake Them Up, which sowed the venom of fear and hatred. Created in 1990, Kangura published the Racist Charter, which some of you may know, the 10 Commandments of Bahutu. That was a program of action to prepare to exterminate the Tutsi. Of the 42 journals existing in Rwanda in 1991, 11 were controlled by the government at the time, and they promulgated the venom of hatred. And I quote, in one of the issues of Kangura, "The Tutsis stole Rwanda from their rightful owners. They do not have the right to live in the Great Lakes region of Africa. And if the Rwandan Patriotic Front takes power, the Hutu will become slaves of the Tutsis again." You see the power of words. And finally, here you have also the failure of the Arusha Accords that had started to bring together to the negotiations between the then government and the rebel army, created in 1991 that went through up to 1994 in an attempt to craft some lasting solutions to the Rwandan crisis. But for various reasons, political and military reasons, the dialogues were delayed and their results were never implemented. before the genocide. The fear of losing political posts within the government was perceptible. And the people close to the President Habyarimana often declined their offer for negotiations. Every day, many people are killed in Kigali, and the capital city. It's also important to mention that the RPF, the Rwanda Patriotic Front, did not respect the Arusha Accords of August 4th in the 1993, and it recruited many young people to its army. And also there were many unaccounted deaths and internally displaced people within Rwanda. That is another thorny issue. Another media station was created, La Radio Télévision Libre de Mille, in the incendiary television that propagated the venom of killing. So all these factors piled together show that actually the genocide did not just happen as a thunder. It had been prepared. And I have just mentioned a few. And then one other major factor before I conclude this section is the slaying of the Hutu president of Burundi, Melchior Ndadaye, who left, the killing left the nation in an explosive situation as many Tutsis and Hutus were killed. The killing of this president, Melchior Ndadaye, was used by those close to President Habyarimana, the then president of Rwanda, and other extremist radicals to convince the population, as they had done previously, that the Tutsis wanted to dominate the whole region by force. In the slaying of Ndadaye and later the killing of Habyarimana, a popular rage, assiduously nursed and mobilized by really pro-Hutu extremists, was unleashed with impunity. So when you wonder how you get to a genocide, it's important to have these facts. And then, of course, you will see Romeo Dallaire, who tried to tell the United Nations that the genocide was being prepared, and his call went unheeded. In conclusion to this first part, favoring intensely one group over another has been Rwanda's internal structural injustice. The repercussions of decades of favoritism created a climate for genocide. The ethnic qualification for political office reinforced for the ruling class's sense of superiority and tribal exclusivism, both prior to independence and after independence. Unjust exclusion from belonging, from participating, from contributing one's nation became an accepted norm and spawned a culture of impunity and corruption. And so, the problematic history of Rwanda leads me to conclude that the perpetrators of atrocities felt they were beyond any moral obligation to protect their vulnerable neighbors. Why would a person who had grown up seeing the Tutsis killed in 1959, 1960s, 1970s, feel remorse for killing them in 1990s, since nothing had compelled him to account for their crimes previously? The genocide certainly was prepared, and so much felt grounds led to it. This has left us lasting wounds, and this is the second part of my presentation. Let me begin by this. It is inaccurate to impute all the wounds of Rwanda to all Hutus. There are outstanding Hutus who often go unnoticed and yet sacrifice themselves for the lives of Tutsis, even died with them. Their heroic status, their heroic deaths remain a living lesson for generations to come. The first to be killed at the beginning of the genocide was the then Prime Minister, Agathe Uwineza, then Rwandan Prime Minister, because she had strongly vied against the planners of the genocide. And then we have another heroine, Sister Felicite Niyitegeka, who offered her life because she did not want to abandon her Tutsi brothers and sisters who had come to hide at their convent. Alongside Rwanda's heroes, certainly, we have this, they remind us the authentic cost of Christian discipleship. Their testimony is that love is stronger than death. We have lasting wounds, certainly. One of the lasting wounds that Rwanda has is that Rwanda has been a landscape of bodies that were treated as disposables. Prior to independence, many Hutus and poor Tutsis lived under forced labor. After independence, many Tutsis were killed, exiled, denied their basic rights, and this went with impunity. During the genocide, Tutsis and moderate Hutus became subhumans. Because of this, Rwandan wounds are not only physical, but they are also deeply interior, and they cut across. This has left what I call, and my dissertation director will recall this, I'm happy that she's here, what I call unreconciled memories in post-genocide Rwanda, an expression of the wounded cultural and social context and what it plays in Rwanda's identity. Unreconciled memories carry many different meanings according to different persons. First, this phrase can apply to the Tutsis who survived the genocide and how they have to leave the arduous task of being the only ones left to tell the story in the midst of so many genocide deniers. Secondly, it denotes the memory of children born of mixed parents, a Tutsi father and a Hutu mother, or vice versa. These children walk a grueling path as they navigate relationships with their relatives who may no longer speak with one another because either some were on the killing side and others were saving lives. The complexity of Rwanda's story. Third, the Tutsis or Hutus who returned to Rwanda after some years of exile, they too experience unreconciled memories. These men and women find that their family members have died at the hands of genocidaires or they were killed during the war. What are they to make of the loss? We also have the genocidaires, or those who were released from prisons and have unreconciled memories. When they get to their villages and they have acquired identities of being former prisoners, they often are not welcome. They do not have anywhere to seek support because the communities in which they settle perceive them as killers. And imagine what that means for women who come and they were considered perpetrators. Women perpetrators have often been perceived as monsters or non-women, a striking contrast to the traditional perception of women as mothers and nurturers in the Rwandan culture. So how do you reintegrate them? We also have those who lost their relatives during the war between the Rwandan government and the Rwandan Patriotic Front. And they too have unreconciled memories. Justice ought to continue pursuing those who committed crimes prior to, during, and after the genocide. A Rwandan scholar, Samuel Kyuma, rightly notes, even though numerous factors fueled the crisis, this does not deny the fact that the former Hutu state is liable for the genocide. Likewise, the Rwandan Patriotic Front is also liable for the killings that happened during the war, alongside the then government. Finally, the genocide and its aftermath have left Rwandans with identity in flux. Post-genocide Rwanda exemplifies the complexity of overlapping identities and roles in which people find themselves prior to, in times of, or after violent killings. For instance, some militia members hid some Tutsis while also engaging in killings. Others who killed argue that they obeyed the commands of their superiors, ignoring the issues of following one's own conscience. So social identities resulting from the genocide in Rwanda are complicated by the dual roles of some individuals who committed the murder and still also hid Tutsis, and Tutsis who disguised themselves and participated in the killings and later claimed to be victims. Persons caught in these intertwined situations often compete for victimhood as people who suffered. Unfortunately, placing them in the strict legal categories of victims and perpetrators minimizes the complexity of the genocide. So don't look at the genocide in Rwanda in black and white. So what could be the lessons then for the global church? You will all agree with me, hopefully, that Christian mission is essentially concerns the inner transformation of identity. This mission is not about statistics. The identity in Christ opposes the exclusive of socially constructed categories that make some humans, some persons, feel that they are more entitled to life more than others. Emmanuel Kotongore notes, the Ugandan theologian notes, Christian faith is fundamentally about identity, who we are as enfleshed people. Rwanda's horrendous past urges Christians to rethink their identity, which must be rooted in a genuine love of neighbor. And Thomas Aquinas will put beautifully, love is beyond mere sentiments. Love is willing the good of the other and doing something concrete about it. While analysis of the genocide easily escape pre-established political historical paradigms, the facts behind any genocide oblige an epistemological break. The world should have stopped to rethink how on earth could we end up again with another genocide. The church must question our previous choices and methods of evangelization. The late Professor Laurenti Magesa has written a wonderful chapter in our book on this, rethinking the methods of evangelization in Rwanda. It is fair to say, as a Katongore does, that to look, and I quote, to look into the mirror that is Rwanda, we need to pay close attention to how identities get shaped by stories that so often remain hidden. End of quote. The stories we tell have the capacity to heal, but also the capacity to kill. And in doing so, we must renew our imagination. Consequently, the experiences of a wounded church in Rwanda provoke and should liberate our imagination to envision the possibilities of new evangelization. And here I propose 3 lessons for the global church. First, and this comes, of course, alongside the transformation of identity. First, we must challenge a Christianity of duplicity. One must interrogate what prevents faith from becoming a culture. We must raise questions about the nature of Christianity that has engulfed the African continent, its principles, and its capabilities of transformation of a continent where violence, poverty, and exclusion have largely remained the daily realities of most people. Orthopraxy must serve as a criterion for orthodoxy. The Australian Jesuit theologian Gerard O'Collins puts it beautifully, and I quote, "Not everyone who recites the Chalcedonian Confession really believes in Christ. Verbal correct Christology can cloak a highly deficient Christopraxy." Or maybe the beautiful words of Karl Rahner that the Christian of the future will either be a mystic or not a Christian at all. One can no longer be impressed by a Christianity which considers the social show to be more important than the depth of faith of its people. Congolese theologian Kamana opines that one must question a Christianity organized around a priestly figure to the detriment of the prophetic and apostolic functions of the people of God. A form of religion that plays or preys more on religious emotions than on the intelligence and imagination of our people. Questioning a Christian of duplicity. We must question a Christianity that sings and dances while our society is sinking. In Africa, there is certainly a lot of religiosity and it is beautiful, but how does that transform our society? Therefore, it is necessary to listen to the people of God as they express their hopes and pains and make an effort to respond to their needs. The vitality of listening to God's people with compassion must not stifle the spirit of those who are courageous enough to interrupt. And this is my second proposal to our global church. We must have the courage to interrupt unjust structures and persons to become a prophetic church. The Gospel of Matthew presents a woman who entered the house of Simon, if you recall, Simon the leper, with an alabaster jar of costly perfume oil, and poured it on Jesus' head while he was reclining at the table. We had this like 3 weeks ago, if you remember. And this is in the Gospel of Matthew chapter 26, verse 6. The woman was bold enough to interrupt a patriarchal gathering. Jesus then praised her in these words, and I quote, "Wherever this gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will be told in memory of her." You remember this is actually a book by Elizabeth Johnson, the title of her book. If we would sit at Jesus' table, we must live in solidarity, walking with the little ones who are the only signs of his presence among us. If we give them room, not only will we develop a sense of belonging and identity, but we also have no need of intruders or untimely guests in our communities. In this current synod on synodality, in the journey in which we are, we should keep asking, who is missing at the table? Just as Jesus spoke out against those missing at the conversation table, I dream of a church where church gatherings will echo similar sentiments as those of Jesus towards this woman who anointed him. A church where wounded intruders can gather enough courage to be vulnerable, to be themselves, and in turn become healed and be praised. The Nigerian proverb puts it beautifully. Those who gather around the table of the Lord in the Eucharist should not in turn eat one another. The genuine living of the good news must force us to question social behaviors such as uncritical obedience to authority that many people had in Rwanda, misguided and uncritical loyalties, and greed for resources. I think that's a lesson for the world. Rwanda's tragedies invite us to rethink, or better reinvent, Christians' understanding and depth of baptism, and whether it has claims on our cultural and social identities and bodies. It entails the transformation of minds, which requires the evangelization of the entire culture of people. My esteemed Jesuit Bishop Rodrigo, just published a book on evangelization of cultures. This should challenge the commonly held Swahili proverb that goes, damu ni mzito kuliko maji. Blood is heavier than water, even it is the water of baptism. This requires constructive critique whenever the church attempts to evade the dangerous memory of the crucified Jesus. It must be embedded in desire to reinvent ourselves, that is to make an epistemological break, if I will use the words of Jean-Marc Keller. It must also help us to to bring those who we don't want them to intrude. The ability to interrupt requires courage. Interruptive courage means never letting the memory of the wrongdoings fade away, by stifling for conversion without conversion. Interruptive courage is an emotional and cognitive process that advances brave action and creativity and helps people risk things they most value and give them the urgency to act according to their conscience. Interruptive courage is a virtue that Katongore calls a rebel consciousness. In the current divided world, we need more rebels for the gospel. It is the realization that some norms cannot just be followed, rather, something prophetic must be done. Despite the multi-layered historical wounds of Rwanda, there were also other people whose courageous love symbolized the idea that those whose integrity is not up for sale, they are ready to give up their lives in order to protect it. So, Rwanda questions the whole church. Is our integrity up for sale? This we should be crazy enough to interrupt. And finally, another lesson is that we should be committed to memory, a memory that deconstructs biases and celebrates the achievement that women have brought in Rwanda. Commitment to memory and truth are imperative. Constantly reviewing Rwanda's past to forge a future in which God summons all of us, Tutsis, Hutus, and Twa. This memory is not an option. The widening of hearts confronts ethnic biases which seek advantage at the expense of others. The esteemed theologian Bernard Lonergan defines a bias as a distortion to intellectual development. People are fixed in immovable categories because of biases. The biases result often from unconscious motivation rooted in the way people have been brought up to look down upon others. So at the heart, if there is a lesson Rwanda should offer us, is that we should deconstruct biases. They are terrible. Because if there is one thing we should know, biases and prejudices are not only for Rwandans, they cut across. I lived here in America, and sometimes I suffered it. To deconstruct these biases, we should follow the way of Jesus, the way that allows no significance to biases. In his meeting with sinners and lepers, and the woman at the well in Samaria, in the Gospel of John, chapter 4, Jesus affirms the way he teaches accords no significance to a person's race, or ethnicity, or culture, or country. Jesus' way announces God's exclusive power and desire to create and name us all as God's sons and daughters. Therefore, theologians must reinvent this way in post-genocide Rwanda. We should deconstruct all biases. It makes no one greater to be a Hutu or a Tutsi or a Twa. Biases have killed us. Theology might bear witness as we accompany ordinary wounded Rwandans in grappling with dreadful deadly memories, the fears and the resentments, and an unresolved anger which crowd the mind and conscience. If there is one area, certainly, we have to know in commitment to memory, is that Rwanda, we still have a long journey to uncover all the memories. Certainly, it is impossible to imagine a new future for ourselves until we find ways to remember or reimagine ourselves differently. American philosopher Jeffrey Brustein insists that remembering wrongdoings entails that the latter is now invested with different meanings because it is acknowledged as wrong, it is given its proper name, and responsibility is taken for it. The point of this commitment to memory is because the 1994 genocide and its aftermath, and all those who died opposing the genocide, should not be banished to the midst of pseudo-past. They cannot be forgotten. To heal and reconcile Rwandan wounds, and there are many and multifaceted. Each defaced Rwandan, Twa, Hutu, or Tutsi, should count in the search for truth, justice, peace, and lasting reconciliation. This search fosters solidarity of memory that should uncover all the stories of Rwanda. In this commitment to memory, let us honor the place of women. In Rwanda, women here now hold key positions established to deal with the challenges of reconciliation in the aftermath of the genocide against the Tutsi. They worked in the Unity and Reconciliation Commission. They worked within the Gacaca traditional court set to help heal the country despite their limitations. Women played a major role as community mediators, abunzi, and contributed to resolving conflicts using traditional Rwandan practice of conflict resolution. Now women, we have 61% of women in the parliament, and they have helped to actually craft laws that help against domestic violence. They have also helped in crafting the laws that help for inheritance, for girls to inherit property from their parents. The statistics that I mentioned here are not just folkloric. Women in Rwanda deliver. There's certainly a journey to make, but they have made a huge difference. Now, as I move towards the end of my presentation, another lesson for Rwanda, it comes from the power of forgiveness. After a country that suffered so much from a genocide and its aftermath, the consequences of the genocide, the fact that people can still live together on the same hill is a miracle. Forgiveness announces a miracle that should not make us forget everything that people have gone through. All the suffering suffered and caused in Rwanda cannot be forgotten. Forgiveness, rather, should engage many factors. On the side of the victim, as the French philosopher and Jesuit philosopher, theologian Guillaume Cos says, forgiveness requires that the victim be taken care of, that he or she can say what she has experienced and be able to give her consent for the reparation. Forgiveness cannot be forced. On the other side of the aggressor, forgiveness requires that there is the will of the person who committed the crime to recognize, to regret, to become aware of what he has done. Forgiveness should engage the community to rebuild. With crimes like the genocide in Rwanda, the social fabric was broken. Every Rwandan is wounded. It is therefore necessary to heal, rebuild, and reconcile not only the victim and his aggressor, but the latter must also have their place in the community. What forgiveness does, it is restorative on both sides, to the victim and to the wrongdoer. The miracle of forgiveness does not erase what happened. When I met the killer of my siblings, he asked me to forgive him, and I read that in my book. And after a struggle, we embraced one another, and I forgave him. And I was not sure on what ground I was standing, but I realized that journey set me free. Forgiveness announces that the victim has had a hard time, but they have become able to trust again and open up to the possibility of a new future. The French philosopher whom you know, Paul Ricoeur, says that the contribution of forgiveness is generosity. Or what forgiveness really does is doing the impossible. And so, my dear friends, as I conclude, is it possible to study theology or other sciences and to be church today, ignoring what happened 30 years ago? The unfortunate thing is that the only lesson we learn from history is that we don't learn anything. Rwanda's tragic history calls us to take theological anthropology seriously and opens dialogue to construct a new theology. the genocide and its aftermath question our understanding of what human beings are and what we are actually capable of. A theology born from symbols is needed to appropriate Rwanda's appalling past and to offer new horizons of meaning. There's a beautiful story, as I conclude, from a parish in New Orleans, Louisiana. During the desegregation period here in America, there was a church called St. Francis de Sales. And there was a barricade that separated the whites and the blacks. The blacks would sit behind the barricade, and the whites would sit up front. When the church is desegregated, they removed the barricade and they put it in the lower church. Parishioners started to rethink of how they are going to remake the altar. So some creative parishioner says, we are going to use this same barricade that separated us to make a new altar. You know, they wanted the moving altars, where the priest could face the people. So they used that barricade to refashion the new altar. On the day of the consecration of the church, reconsecration of the altar, the bishop said, now the barricade that once separated us is now the same wood that brings us together around the table of the Lord. In Rwanda, we have so many beautiful churches and so many altars, but I think we need to be more creative. How can we use our wounded past to own our messy past in the liturgy? Rwanda may serve as a mirror or a cautionary lesson to the world only if we open our eyes. When a community's memory passes over the grave historical injustices it committed, it insults the descendants of the injured by injustice. Remembrance is owed to the living descendants of the victims of injustice on the grounds that the current group is entitled to have its own understanding of the past validated. If there is a lesson should have in Rwanda, is that we have to take memory seriously, but we should constantly ask whose memory. Within the context of Rwanda, the world must be viewed differently after the horrific tragedies we have had. Finally, post-genocide Rwanda teaches us that we cannot ask others to value our lives more highly than we do ourselves. Hence, the duty to preserve memory and to tell all our stories. We should also never wait to ask permission to do what is right to protect people. We must stand firm against the politics of ethnicism and populism that divide people. The culture of impunity that lasted in Rwanda needs always to be fought from the onset. This is a lesson for the global world. Rwanda offers hope, definitely, and I end on that note. Offers hope which should envision the redemption of all. The task of Christian theology is to analyze the meaning of hope in God in such a way that the oppressed community is given in a given society will risk for earthly freedom, a freedom made possible in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Hope calls for creativity and initiative. If people can still live together in Rwanda, it simply shows that there is hope. Hope makes us to understand the world in which we live as a world of possibilities, transformation in which we can save the future through love, justice, and peace. There is certainly a long journey, but there is hope. Towards the end of the film, which some of you may know, the film The Shawshank Redemption, one major character, Andy DeFresne, tells another character, the name is Red, and he says, hope is a good thing. Maybe the best of things, and no good thing ever dies. We invite you, as you have invited me, to be part of this initiative and to be bearers of hope. And I thank you for your privileged attention.
Marcel, thank you very much for your presentation. When I read your talk, you had presented it as Rwandan genocide. Is it really okay for us, if we want to name it and to really make sure that we do not forget, put it in our memories, to say this was actually Tutsis genocide? I know it could be political, but that's one question. Another one that I would want to ask, I hope you won't forget this, is on the side of reconciliation. And I'm talking of when Kagame took over and he started pursuing the so-called perpetrators. Don't you think there was too much that was done that caused a little bit of damage towards reconciliation in the nation? Those are two.
Thank you very much, Mondi. For your information, I studied with Mondi some years back, so it's good to see you here again. There is a wonderful novel by Mindboy, written from South Africa. The title is called Mindboy. And in the novel in South Africa, as you recall, during apartheid, there was people were known by numbers, or you needed to have a pass to be able to move from Soweto to Johannesburg. I was there last week. And in the writer of this novel, Mindboy, he says, what is in a name? Why am I known by a number? If you recall, even Nelson Mandela, when he was in prison, he was known by his number. So there is a way the name also, not giving a name to what something is, actually defaces. So, and I think at the first part of my presentation, I wanted to make it very clear. Certainly, Rwanda has had multiple wounds. But the genocide was, first of all, really targeting the minority Tutsi. Alongside, some other people died, but the idea really was to exterminate the Tutsis. And that's why the official nomenclature, if I would say, of what happened in Rwanda is the genocide against the Tutsis. That certainly, there were many Hutus who died. Some of us survived because some Hutus hid us at the risk of their lives. But why? Because the Tutsis were being pursued. So it's good to name things as they are. Otherwise, these unclear ambiguities also often defaces those who died, or we kill them twice. So it's good to set that very clear. While knowing that every life is sacred, no one should die. No one should, regardless of their ethnic or class affiliation, no one should die. But in 1994, from the 7th, the people were targeted. And you see the groups that I highlighted at the beginning that had been formed were targeting a particular group, or those who oppose the killings. So that's very important. But in no way that does exculpate any other killing that happened. That's what I want to make, the point I want to make that clear. Now, you are bringing me, I'm not a politician, so let me put that clear, and this puts me in an awkward position. I hope this is not going to make me a politician. So I am a Jesuit, a simple Jesuit priest, theologian. So speaking about the regime of Kagame, certainly I'm not a political scientist. I think the idea of pursuing the truth is always important. Because if you call it things other names, or you don't bring people to justice on what happened, then actually you are perpetuating that culture of impunity that had also been there before. So it's good to set as a common denominator that injustice is injustice and should be pursued. And this should have happened prior to independence, during post-independence, or even now. That's what I could say. So without going into the details, since I am not a political scientist. Thank you very much for your questions.
Marcel, you've talked of what the church in general could do and could see what is happening in Rwanda. But also this question is for what is the church in Rwanda doing for the people now to make sure that there is that not only just reconciliation, but also building new memories for the future.
Thank you very much, Omondi. In my upcoming book, and I'm very grateful to Brian, who has been helping me a lot in this book, I have a chapter on the church. This will be published hopefully at the end of this year. And so in this presentation, certainly I did not focus so much on church, as you noticed, because there is only so much you can do in 45 minutes. But the Church of Rwanda certainly, again, let's come to a clear definition of what we mean by church. I hope we are not just only referring to popes, to bishops. We are all people of God. If we are to go back to the Second Vatican Council, the mystery of the church, then the second chapter of Lumen Gentium is people of God, of which the hierarchy is part. So by church here, when I want to refer to all the people. But definitely the church has leadership. So if we are now to narrow it down, what have the church leaders done in Rwanda, maybe there I can give an answer. There have been some outstanding figures in Rwanda who certainly have championed the cause of reconciliation. And some of them I would mention. If you go into my chapter on church in the upcoming book, I speak of a bishop, then Bishop of Kabwai, Tadei Nsengiyumva, who actually had been vocal. This is prior to the genocide. This is happening. If we don't act, Rwandans, we are hypocrites, we are not converted enough. In one of his pastoral letters to the whole diocese of Kabwai. So he had warned us. Maybe he often doesn't get the credit he deserves. He was killed on the 5th of June 1994, then by some groups within the Kagame group. So that's one voice we need to raise. We have also had, I mentioned today, a few people who gave their lives. Those are members of the church who certainly gave their lives and got killed. Felicite Niyitegeka is one of them. But the bishops of Rwanda, post-genocide Rwanda, have also championed the cause of reconciliation. In 1998, 9, and 2000, just as we are going towards the celebration of the Jubilee, of 2000-year Jubilee and 100 years of Rwanda's evangelization, we had what we called Gacaca Nyiristu. That is a synod, really helping Rwandans to, as we celebrate 2,000 years of evangelization and 100 years of evangelization in Rwanda, we can't do it like anybody else, given what we have just what we had just experienced. So the synods were moments where people got healed, where people got to know the truth, where people got actually to realize that everybody suffered. And we have a beautiful expression in Kinyarwanda, kubabara and kubabarira. Kubabara means I suffer, kubabarira, I suffer with. So as people people shared their sufferings, they realized that actually it's not only the survivors who suffered. There were many others who suffered. And that actually helped for mutual healing during those synods. So even as we speak of the synod currently, Rwanda had a serious one just prior to the Jubilee year of 2000. That was certainly a powerful event. The current Archbishop of Kigali has a chapter in our book on this, on the role of the church in Rwanda in this synodal process towards the Jubilee year. We also had should I say, a prophetic priest who had lost many members of his family. This is Father Ibard. And he contributed a lot to the healing after even forgiving members of his family. He has written a book, Forgiveness Sets You Free. And he engineered parish reconciliation where ex-prisoners and survivors came together to undergo a form of catechism for six months, and they journeyed together. at a parish level. And he was trying to see how this can cut across to the rest of the nation. So several initiatives. Then we have had other initiatives by Le Bon Samaritain, Samaritan Wimouwe, in Kigali. They visited prisoners, accompanied them. Because if you are speaking of reconciliation, you can't just only be on one side. It has to be redemptive to all sides. So the Good Samaritans have helped a lot in this area. But I hope this is going to come up in our conversation tomorrow, the role of the church. So mine, I was invited to speak on the political, social grounds that led to the genocide and lessons for the church. But certainly there have been a lot that the church does. There is still more. 30 years is just a short time to heal the wounds. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your talk, Professor Uwineza. There are many students here, and I'm sure that faculty have prepared them, but I wonder if you might say a little bit more about the gotcha courts in a more concrete way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's always good when you have your former dissertation director attending your lecture. You feel very much supported. May I please ask you to give her a round of applause? So I am very honored to have you, Professor Copeland. And I think there are others who have also come. So thank you very much, Barbara, for all those who have come. Now, in the presentations tomorrow, I perused through. There will be some talks on gacaca. So that's why I said, let me focus on this, because this is going to come tomorrow. But the gacaca gacaca means actually grass. Meaning, if I were to give you an analogy, it will be the Truth and Justice Commission that some of you may know from South Africa, to set a composition of place so that you know what I mean. And the genocide did not engineer gacaca. Gacaca existed prior to the genocide. As a way of solving or dealing with community issues or conflicts, to see how you can, instead of going to the normal courts, how you can solve your problems within the community or the locality. Now, after the genocide, with so many people who had been wounded, so many people who had been either accused rightly or falsely and were in jail, in prisons that had actually been, we had prisons that were meant, I think, for 15,000 according to some books, 15,000 prisoners, and all of a sudden you have more than 200,000. So the prisons or jails could not contain the people. And secondly, how do you financially sustain the care of prisoners? And how do you begin even a journey of healing people or getting to know the truth if you only put people or leave them in the normal jail or prisons? So the government of Rwanda engineered the gacaca. And actually, I should say, the gacaca of the government was maybe inspired by the gacaca of the church that I just mentioned. Because the gacaca Nyirisitu, the synod that prepared people to the 2,000-year celebration of the birth of Jesus and 100 years of evangelization in Rwanda. So sometimes this goes unnoticed. So the government gacaca to heal the wounded of Rwanda should be acknowledged that was inspired in a sense by the Ecclesiology gacaca. And so they are set up in 2001. If my memory is correct, I have to check the dates. And then they were to help really people to know what happened. Like what they had in South Africa. Sit on the ground, on the grass, know what happened, who killed who, where people were thrown, and also who is falsely accused. But some people were jailed really unjustly. And this ushered a process of healing and reconciliation. Because then you begin to say, people were saying that you killed so, but so-and-so is saying that he was killed by so-and-so. Then you begin to see actually conflicting narratives. You see, it sets up a journey of healing and reconciliation. And then, of course, then you begin to know where your people were thrown. I got to know where my siblings were thrown. 3 siblings were thrown in a pit latrine because of gachacha. In America, you may not know what a pit latrine is. These are holes in some rural villages where people go to the toilet. So during the gachacha, this came out, and so we went to that pit latrine and exhumed them and gave them a decent burial. So the gachacha helped. As long as you haven't buried your person, you still think that they are going to come back. And this is the story of so many Rwandans, and not only Tutsis. And so thank you for the question. So in short, the gachacha was a government-engineered judicial process at a traditional level to help Rwandans reconcile. It had a lot of weaknesses. The judges were not often properly trained. If you read in some books, you will hear some corruptions happened, but it had a lot of benefits. So in my presentation, I tried to look at both sides of the coin. Thank you very much.
Firstly, thank you for coming to speak to us today. My question is sort of twofold. You mentioned sort of in passing, you mentioned in passing that in some instances, even Catholic clergy participated in the violence. So it's evident to me that there was some real power in whatever rhetoric immediately preceded the violence. I was wondering if you could give a little insight into what that consisted of and what we as lay people should look out for, and in terms of that rhetoric today and how we ought to combat it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. Maybe let me begin with this short anecdote. I did my final year of Jesuit formation in Lebanon. And our tertiary instructor, a wonderful man, as we were ending our formation, he gave us this beautiful injunction or the exhortation. And he gave the story of a saint, Saint Chabel. He's popularly known in Lebanon, Saint Chabel. And when he was a young man, he wanted to be a priest. And he went and approached his father. And the father said, I knew it, looking at how you carry yourself, how you are almost always in church and what, I could tell this is where it is going to end. But then he said, actually, I think you'll be more than a priest. You are probably going to be a cardinal. And then the son, very profound, he looked at the father in the eyes and said, Dad, I'm not going to join the clergy because I want to claim ranks. Just pray that I am a man of God. Now, it's one thing to wear this and show that you are a priest. It's another thing, actually, to be a man of God. It's better if you can be both, definitely. So just to begin with that, and I gather that wherever I go, those words from our tertiary instructor. So to answer your question, certainly, and I think this is a fact, some of you we have had a conversation, those who have visited some churches in Rwanda, those who went to Nyange parish that was demolished, there is a priest, Seromba, who actually asked, together with a businessman, they asked a bulldozer and they killed, it came and killed people inside the church. So this happened. In my presentation, really I tried to minimize, to make this my personal story. But when I left my home together with my mom, we went to the nearby Catholic church. You will get that in my book. Please buy the book. We went to the nearby church in Bjimana. Father Joseph, we asked him, look what is happening. We have nowhere else to go. Our houses has been burnt, properties confiscated. My dad had been killed. So could you please give us an accommodation for one night? And he said, go, I have no place for you here. So the question you're asking is not an abstraction for me. I lived it. And actually, there is nothing that can replace the power of survivors. You may deny it, but it's a fact. That cannot be denied. So to your question, the clergy is also, some of them, not all of them. There were many wonderful ones, and there are many died actually saving lives. But some had embraced the ethnic ideology. And this is a serious call even today, to be seriously converted. So that's one. Secondly, some of them also, I would say, you grow up in an environment that is poisonous, you seriously need a serious conversion to see that what is being given is poison. Right? If you are not able to break down the biases that I spoke, the biases of Bernard Lonergan, a bias as really a distortion to clear thinking, then easily you can end like this. I still have a journey to make. I hope one day I will be able to go and visit Joseph. He's in prison now. So just to give you an example, he's been sentenced for 30 years. So the journey of reconciliation is always ongoing. And so to your question, we have to be seriously converted. If we have some students of theology in this class, Bernard Lonergan has these 3 levels of conversion: intellectual conversion, religious conversion, and moral conversion. If you could read those in method in theology, that would be great. Because you may say, I don't need intellectual conversion, but you may need a religious one. Or you need a moral one. All of us need one. So thank you very much for your question.